In this video, I'm going to be telling you about a narrative I think has a very strong chance of being the dominant narrative in crypto over the next 6 to 12 months, and I'm going to be showing you one protocol I think that is poised to take advantage of it if everything goes well. So, if that sounds good to you, you know what to do. Hit the likes and let's get into the video. Hey guys, I'm Alessandro. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into what I think is going to be a very, very hot narrative over the next 6 to 12 months. That narrative has been pushed forward by Hyperliquid's success. In the past, we've seen L1 wars. It's always been, what's the next L1? What's the L1 killer? What's the Ethereum killer? What's the Solana killer? But I think over the next few months, over the next few years, especially in crypto, we're going to see application-specific wars. What's the best app that does this? Yes, we're still going to see updates to infra. We've got some big chains coming through pretty soon. Obviously, we've got Monad, Mega ETH, those kinds of things. But fundamentally, I do think that it's going to be application-specific wars and which ones are going to be producing the best user experience apps. Hyperliquid's been a breakthrough, right? And the only reason it broke through is because they completely changed the on-chain narrative. What did they do? Well, really what they did is they allowed for Clobs, which is why I think the next narrative to sort of like come to fruition is going to be the Clob wars. Now, what is a Clob? Let me just show you real quick what a Clob is, because it's not very confusing, but it sounds pretty weird. So Clobs just stand for Central Limit Order Books, and this is lighter, but every application, every perpetuals DEX, or every standard exchange looks like this. It doesn't need to be a perps DEX. If you go Binance, Bybit, whatever, it looks like this. And all a central limit order book is you have sellers in red and you've got buyers in green. And every time, this order book's constantly changing, and every time a buyer and a seller decide that they want to agree on a price, a trade is executed. So if you look at all these trades up here, everyone who's trying to sell at 1.526, funny bit on Filecoin, is not going to have their orders hit until the order below's hit, below. The only people who are going to have an order hit in the near term, in the next few seconds, are people who are paying this price to buy and paying and selling at this price. If anybody wants to come in and offer a market order, let's say, for example, I want to do a market buy. I need to match my buy with a sell. So I'm going to buy at the lowest price someone's offering a sell at, and vice versa. If I want to sell, I'm going to sell at the highest price someone's offering to buy at. That's all a Clob is, a central limit order book. And you've probably seen them in a bunch of different places, whether that's Lighter, Hyperliquid, whatever, right? You've seen them. Binance, Bybit, all centralized exchanges run off these. In fact, Clobs are the best way to structure markets. And in the past in crypto, we've seen AMMs, right? Automated market makers. Now they're fine for bootstrapping liquidity, and they've worked really well for that. But in terms of actually progressing from here, they're really quite bad. So if we look at all the reasons why Clobs are better than AMMs, they allow for true price discovery. So for a Clob, the benefit is really high because it allows for true price discovery, whereas an AMM doesn't really allow for that because of the way that the two tokens are. If you don't know what an AMM is, an AMM is just when you go to any DEX like Uniswap, Aerodrome, whatever, you've got two tokens in a liquidity pool and you've paired them together, and it's a really inefficient use of capital because essentially the tokens are paired across either the entire range or a condensed version of the range. But as soon as if you choose a condensed version, as soon as the value is outside of that range, your position is completely one token or completely another token, and basically it just creates a lot of what's known as impermanent loss, and it's quite hard unless you're running really sophisticated methodologies to get around that. And so they don't allow for true price discovery. They're highly capital inefficient, This is automatic market makers, whereas Clobs are very capital efficient. This is why Hyperliquid is able to provide such deep liquidity on essentially not an enormous amount of TVL because it runs on a Clob. They allow for execution precision, right? Because you can set limit orders and you can decide whatever price you want to buy at. That's much better than coming in with a market order for absolutely everything and being like sandwich attacked essentially because someone is able to push their order through before you. They allow for like suitability and scalability at high volumes, deep order books, whereas AMMs essentially offer really thin liquidity, and market makers can actually function and make money by market making, which essentially they often can't run positive EV strategies if they're not running in a Clob environment. So Clobs are quite important for that reason, right? And this is where I think the token that we're going to speak about today has a good chance of succeeding. The reason Hyperliquid has done so well is because it created its own L1. This is the explorer for Hyperliquid, right? And every single one of these is a transaction. So you can see super rapid transactions. A super rapid block time, sorry. These are 7 millisecond block times, so ridiculously quick. And if you just open up any one of these block times, what you can see is that at the top of the block is a cancel order. If we go to the bottom, we might start seeing, here we go, we can start seeing long, short, whatever else, right? And this is because the architecture of Hyperliquid is such that cancel orders are prioritized over execute orders. So obviously when you've got a 7 millisecond block time, you have a bunch of transactions all happening at the same time. So how do you decide which transactions are at the top of the block and which ones are at the bottom of the block? Well, they decided that cancel transactions come before execute transactions because that prevents toxic order flow and allows for market makers to essentially do their job. If they don't have that, which essentially a non-purpose built L1 would have, because anyone can push their transaction through over someone else if they're willing to pay the higher priority fee, like on Solana, for example, then it creates a situation where it's very, very hard for market makers, people who are providing liquidity, to stay for their expected value or their returns to stay positive, for their P&L to stay positive. I'm just going to quickly mention one thing. See this thing here where it says spread. The spread is actually a really, really important thing. And what the spread is the difference between the cheapest sell and the most expensive buy. The smaller the spread, the better it is for a user. And so market makers are incentivized to come in and reduce the spread if they can generate a lot of users, because obviously they're making money on the trades. And all market makers do is they allow people to buy and they allow people to sell all the time. For example, if you were to sell some gold, let's say you went to a pawn shop. If you go to a pawn shop, you can both sell your gold to that pawn maker and you can buy gold from them. So they're essentially making that market. But they're obviously going to buy from you at less than they're going to sell to you so they can make the difference. That's the spread. So this particular project, right, is called Zeta Markets. And actually, it's not called Zeta Markets. It used to be called Zeta Markets. And I think they're uniquely positioned to take advantage of this kind of like Clob war narrative because they've been trying to build a Clob on Solana for the last 4 years. So they started in sort of 2021. And they've been trying to, and they raised again in 2024. Anaatoly was an investor, interestingly. These guys have been trying to build a Clob on Solana since 2021, and they built this product here, Zeta Markets. And essentially, it wouldn't work, right? Because of the following reasons. You just can't run a Clob, a central limit order book, on Solana right now with the current infrastructure. The block times are too slow and the latency is too slow. What does that mean? That means essentially people who are coming in to reduce that spread and to market make effectively can't do it with positive expected value. They can't do it with positive P&L basically, very effectively, which means they're not incentivized to do so. So why would they come over to the platform? It also means, from a user perspective, it's not very good either because you have to constantly manually sign a transaction when you want to place an order, when you want to cancel an order, all that sort of stuff, which doesn't really make for a very good user experience. So they've tried to build this, right? And they were just essentially unsuccessful in building the product they wanted to build. So they said, okay, what can we do? They've pivoted and now they're building an L2. So they've got dedicated block space for the DEX. And they are building an optimistic rollup on Solana that is essentially secured by ZK proofs. These guys have sort of pulled in a bunch of different, essentially some of the best infrastructure, some of the best tech that's been produced over the last few years. So they're built with the same language as Solana, Rust. They've also pulled in some DA from Celestia, so Celestia's best tech, and they're also using some of the best tech from Ethereum, right, from all the L2s in zero knowledge proofs. So they're sort of tying a bunch of stuff together, and what they've been able to produce is an L2 with really very low latency, which is the best thing for a market maker because that's what market makers need. They need low latency because that allows them to reduce the spreads, to keep the spreads really tight, basically, which is essentially what users want and what market makers want to remain profitable. So they've got super low latency, real low block times as well, and high throughput. These guys are doing they can handle about 35 or 34k transactions per second, which isn't actually as much as Solana. However, obviously they haven't got to compete against all the other applications that are existing on their chain because their chain is specific for the perp DEX. And yes, 34k isn't actually that high, but if they were hitting 34k TPS, they'd be making a lot of money. So it's an upper limit that if it's ever hit, it would be an amazing problem for them to have, because they'd be probably at that sort of stage, like 40-50% of Binance's volume or Binance's transactions. So that's what Bullet is, and I think it's uniquely positioned, right? And I think it's uniquely positioned because they've currently got a liquid token. So this old Zeta Markets was a liquid token, and it's migrating to being Bullet. So you're essentially able to get into this DEX before the platform's really gone live, because they've already got a liquid token. And I think this Clob war sort of narrative is really going to take off when you consider this is Uniswap versus Coinbase and Binance trade volume over the last 7 days. Like, Binance in terms of spot volume is so much higher than Uniswap, right? And you can see, like, over the last, if we go for all data, Uniswap just hasn't really gained against these players. It gained a lot it gained a portional amount in 2021, and since then it's just been not really gaining against them. And if we look at how the DEX to SEX ratio has changed over time, people are coming on chain. Like, this is a number that is trending up. So people who are going from using, more people are going from using centralized exchanges to using DEXs. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. It could be, stuff like Coinbase leaked all user data. That isn't very, very good. You've got the need for people want to hold custody of their tokens, because as soon as they're put on chain, obviously you've got the risk of things like FTX happening. So holding onto their funds and trading on chain makes it much better from a user perspective in terms of safety. But this is clearly trending up over time, right? The DEX to SEX ratio. The one thing I think is holding it back more than anything is the lack of Clobs on chain. So I do think over the next kind of like narrative, I'm unsure if DEXs will be able to survive for the most part, or able to thrive as like the biggest ones, unless they are able to offer some kind of Clob mechanism. Now, those are not going to exist on chains like Ethereum, and even probably chains like Base for the moment as we know it, because they cannot handle the block times required, the latency required, and the TPS required. So, well, they probably could handle the TPS actually, they just can't handle the block times and the latency. And so there's a unique space here for app-specific chains, or application-specific protocols like Hyperliquid, and potentially Bullet. I think Bullet stands out because it can be the answer to Hyperliquid on Solana, and it might have two things going for it, right? The first thing is that if Hyperliquid gets a bunch of FUD, when you Hyperliquid is currently a validator set of 21, they the funds are stored on a 3 or 4 multi-sig. There's a lot of things that could happen that could go wrong. There's a lot of things that could, well, a few things that could happen that would be a bit of a disaster. If those things happen, then suddenly that'll be a big problem. And I think a Solana-based alternative is uniquely positioned to take advantage of any FUD in that realm. And if we look at drift, right, in terms of perpetuals volumes, this is all volumes of all different DEXs. You can see Hyperliquid is absolutely killing it. This one's kind of interesting. 𝗏𝗏 is a dark pools perp DEX that is backed by Binance Labs. Currently got a farming campaign going on right now. Quite interesting. 𝗨𝗏𝗏𝗏, you guys know about 𝗨𝗏𝗏𝗏. I'm still farming 𝗨𝗏𝗏𝗏. I definitely think that is the best place to be trading if you're trading right now, because the points campaign looks like it's very, very strong. And as I said, if these guys can launch at 5-ish% of Hyperliquid's FDV, then that's going to be a real cook for anyone who's been farming that consistently. But drift all the way back here, right, $151 million. Now drift's trading at a $500 million FDV with only $151 million in daily volume. And if we look at their open interest as well, open interest is pretty good actually, which means that there's people who are on the platform holding positions open for a while. There's actually really strong open interest to volume ratio, which is actually shows real users on the platform holding positions open. But I do think that if we go back to here, remember that the issue with Solana-based Clobs right now is that essentially that like drift isn't even a Clob, and we know that the Clobs are the best way for markets to exist. So 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 are the furthest ahead of any Solana-based Clob right now that is essentially purely Solana native. So you've got obviously a Phantom wallet, it connects to it. Yes, you need to bridge across, but the bridge functionality once you're on an L2 is pretty seamless. They can just have that built into the UX really easily. I think they're uniquely positioned to take advantage of the Solana needs for any kind of Clob-based DEX, right? And so that's why I think this is a interesting opportunity. And if we think that they only really need to beat drift's volume of 151 mil, if they run, which it does say in their docs that they have a portion of tokens, any future airdrop or incentives would go to this allocation. There's a pretty strong chance they'll do some kind of incentive structure when they launch. They're planning on launching sometime in Q3. So you would imagine that the value of their relative share on Solana, I think, is probably going to dominate. Well, not necessarily dominate, but I think has a very good chance of beating drift, right? And just trading at $500 million FDV. So that already sort of like puts a line in the sand of if they're beating drift's volumes, open interest, and they're a much better UX than drift. Essentially, these guys should be a better UX than Hyperliquid because their latency is lower. Not necessarily saying they're going to actually beat Hyperliquid because Hyperliquid has so many things going for it. It's just that this is a product that is arguably better, yet to see because it's still in testnet. I can show you the testnet now quickly. The testnet looks a bit like this. So standard Clob, right? They've got a competition going on right now. You can go and you can connect your wallet to testnet, and you can make trades in their testnet. Opening and closing trades at market actually is not really very good right now, which I guess doesn't bode well, but I'm not really too worried if it's a testnet thing. It doesn't really matter too much. But this is what the interface looks like for 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, right? And their founder has said that they're planning on being fully like the mainnet is going to be live in Q3. So the countdown's on, I guess, now for the next 3 months. TBC whether or not they actually launch at that time, but it'd be very, very good if they do. So if they can launch and they can do volumes that are matching or beating drift, then that already sort of puts a line in the sand for what they should kind of be valued at. And so I think right now is with the narrative of the Clob wars coming out, the sort of application-specific wars, and how DEXs a narrative that DEXs need to transition to being some kind of Clob in order to be the most efficient, the best DEX they can be, I think this does create a unique chance for these guys to really capitalize on the lack of a Solana-based, very, very good competitor to Hyperliquid. So that covers that. Thank you ever so much for watching. Of course, if you've got any suggestions on things you want me to go through, just please leave them in the comments. I always check the comments, and I'll endeavour to get some videos out on those for you. As I said, I'm going to be doing more of these videos for you. Going to be coming with some lives pretty soon. Going to be coming with more videos every week. So any comment, any videos that you want me to go through, let me know, and I'll endeavour to do so. Otherwise, of course, as I said, I'm still quite bullish on farming lighter generally. There's some new lighter codes in the description. Otherwise, thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you have an excellent day, and I will see you in the next one.